$500,000 generates $19,500 a year in 2026. Not $40,000, not $50,000, $19,500 before a single tax. Nora learned that number on a Tuesday morning in March at her own kitchen table. She is 58 years old. She has saved $512,000 exactly. For 11 years, she repeated one sentence. When I hit $500,000, I'm done. She hit $500,000 in February. She is not done, not even close. Because the number in her head was never the number the arithmetic actually produces. Most people believe $500,000 is a finish line. You probably did too. In 2026, it is closer to a hinge, not a finish line at all. The point where every decision after it matters more than every dollar before it. This is the arithmetic nobody runs out loud, on camera, with the ugly numbers included. Not whether you should retire, whether $500,000 actually holds under pressure. Here is the part that makes this uncomfortable, especially if you have already run it. $500,000 is a lot of money and not enough money simultaneously. Both statements are true at once. That contradiction is where you are most likely to freeze. Only about 9% of American households have $500,000 or more saved. The median household aged 65 to 74 holds roughly $200,000. So, if you hold $500,000, you sit in the top 10th of savers. And you may still be short. That is the sentence nobody wants to say aloud. Nora froze for 3 years inside exactly that gap between ahead and uncertain. Meanwhile, Northwestern Mutual's 2026 study found Americans believe they need $1,460,000. So, a person holding $500,000 is told they own 34% of retirement. That framing is wrong. It is also extremely profitable for whoever sold it to you. The real question is never whether $500,000 is enough in the abstract. Enough compared to what? Across which years? Against which specific shocks arriving in which order? A portfolio does not fail on average. It fails on one Tuesday for one reason. And the two reasons that break a $500,000 plan are almost never in the thumbnail. Most people guess wrong about both of them. Here's what the data shows. Nora is 58. She works as a hospital scheduling supervisor and earns $68,000. Her husband, Victor, is 61. He drives a regional delivery route for $54,000. Together, they bring in $122,000 before taxes every single year. Their house in Dayton is worth $290,000 with $61,000 remaining. They have $512,000 in retirement accounts. That took 26 years. $411,000 sits in Nora's 401k, another $101,000 in IRAs. They have $18,000 in a savings account and no other debt. By almost every measure printed in a magazine, they are doing well, genuinely well. And every night, Nora lies awake doing the same division problem in her head. $512,000 divided by 30 years equals $17,000 and change annually. That number terrifies her because their current spending runs $71,000 a year. Next door lives Glenn. He is 65 and he has been retiring for 4 years. Glenn has $840,000 saved and a paid-off house worth $300,000. Glenn is not retired. Glenn is still working. Glenn is waiting to hit $2 million. He read the $2 million number in an article in 2019 and never questioned it. He has now traded 6 years of his 60s for a number he invented. You rarely notice the moment your target stopped being math and quietly became superstition. Nora's daughter Marisol is 34. She has $41,000 in a workplace plan. Marisol watches her mother run these numbers and quietly panics about her own timeline. Her husband Curtis is 30. Between them, they save $400 a month. And Nora's niece Tanya, 32, asks the question everyone eventually asks out loud. Why not just leave $500,000 in the bank at 5%? $25,000 a year, she says, and the principal never gets touched. We'll run that number later, and it does not survive first contact with inflation. Let's start where every honest version of this conversation has to start. Nora and Victor need to know one thing. What does the money actually produce? Not what a headline promises, not what an advisor's brochure implies, what it produces. So let's build their picture line by line, using only numbers with sources attached. Start with the fixed costs, because fixed costs are what actually kill retirement plans. Property taxes on their Dayton house run $4,200 annually. Homeowners insurance is $2,100. Utilities average $3,600 yearly. The mortgage payment is $11,400 a year for 6 more years. 2 vehicles cost them $7,200 in insurance, fuel, and maintenance combined. Groceries run $9,600. That is $800 every single month. Add it up, and their unavoidable floor is $38,100. Everything else, travel, gifts, restaurants, hobbies, is the remaining $33,000. That distinction matters more than any withdrawal rate you will ever read about. Because the floor cannot be cut, the ceiling can be cut in a bad year. Most people run one number for spending and call it a plan. You need 2. Nora has 2 numbers. 38,000 she must have, 71,000 she wants. Now the income side, and this is where the surprise lives for almost everybody. Nora's Social Security benefit at 67 is estimated at $26,400. Victor's benefit at 67 is estimated at $23,100. Combined, that is $49,500 a year, inflation adjusted for life. Against a floor of $38,100, their guaranteed income already covers it. Read that again slowly. Social Security alone covers every fixed cost they have. The $512,000 is not the plan. It is the flexibility. That single reframe is the difference between a workable retirement and a decade of insomnia. Let's keep this fair, though. That picture assumes both of them reach 67. It assumes no long-term care event. It assumes both benefits keep arriving. Every one of those assumptions is about to get tested with actual 2026 numbers. Start with the rule you have quoted and almost certainly never actually read. The 4% rule came from a 1994 study by William Bengen, a California engineer. He tested rolling 30-year retirement windows using historical American stock and bond returns. His conclusion? 4% of the starting balance, adjusted for inflation, survived every window. That is a real finding. It is also 32 years old and widely misapplied. Morningstar reruns this arithmetic every year using current bond yields and valuation data. For 2026, their base case safe starting withdrawal rate is 3.9%. That is up from 3.7% in 2025 because bond yields improved. 3.9% of $500,000 is $19,500. Not $20,000, not $25,000. $19,500 in year 1. And that assumes a 30-year horizon with a 90% probability of success. It assumes 30 to 50% in stocks and the remainder in bonds and cash. Here's what nobody tells you about that rate. It deliberately assumes no other income. Morningstar's number describes a portfolio standing alone with no Social Security check behind it. Almost nobody retires that way, which means the rate is your floor, not your ceiling. Run the numbers on Nora's actual situation instead of the textbook version. Her portfolio produces $19,968 at 3.9%. Add $49,500 from Social Security, total $69,468. Their desired spending was $71,000. They are short $1,532. $1,532 a year. That is $128 monthly. 3 years of insomnia over a gap smaller than your cable and phone bills combined. That is the first thing the arithmetic does. It shrinks the fear to actual size. But it also exposes the assumption doing all the heavy lifting in that calculation. Both Social Security checks, both of them, arriving on schedule for 30 straight years. Most people have the size of their own assets exactly backwards. You may too. Nora believes her $512,000 portfolio is her retirement. It isn't. Price a guaranteed, inflation-adjusted, joint life income stream of $49,500. In the private annuity market that costs somewhere between $900,000 and $1.1 million. Their Social Security is worth roughly twice their entire life savings. Twice. They spent 26 years obsessing over the smaller asset and 0 minutes optimizing the larger one. This is why the claiming decision moves more dollars than any fund selection ever will. Victor's benefit at 62 would be $16,200 a year. At 67, it is $23,100. At 70, it is $28,600. That is a 76% increase for waiting 8 years, guaranteed, inflation adjusted, for life. No investment available to a retail investor offers that risk-free return, none of them. The 2026 cost of living adjustment was 2.8%, applied to every benefit. The average retired worker's monthly check moved from 2015 to 2071. $56 a month sounds small. Compounded across a 30-year retirement, it is enormous. Because COLA applies to the larger base, delaying multiplies every future adjustment permanently. Here's what actually happens when you claim early. You protect the smaller asset. They drain the portfolio at 62 so they can leave Social Security untouched. That is precisely backwards. The portfolio is the bridge. Social Security is the destination. Spending down $200,000 between 62 and 70 is not reckless. It buys a permanently larger, inflation-protected, survivor-eligible check. That is the trade. Most people cannot make themselves do it because watching your balance fall feels like failure. That is precisely backwards. The portfolio is the bridge to a permanently larger destination. The number on the statement drops. The actual security of the household rises, both simultaneously. Now the line item that turns comfortable retirements into anxious ones, and it's growing fast. Fidelity publishes an annual estimate of lifetime healthcare costs for a 65-year-old retiree. The 2026 figure is $185,500 per person. For a couple, $371,000 across the rest of retirement. That is 72% of Nora and Victor's entire retirement portfolio, one line item. And that estimate rose 7.5% in a single year. It climbed 4% in 2024, 5% in 2025, 7.5% now. The estimate covers Medicare Parts A, B, and D premiums, plus copays and deductibles. It does not include dental. It does not include vision. It does not include hearing. Critically, it does not include a single dollar of long-term care, not one. Priya works as a benefits counselor and delivers this conversation 11 times a week. She explains that the standard Medicare Part B premium for 2026 is $202.90. That is up $17.90 from $185 in 2025, a 9.7% increase against a 2.8% benefit raise. Read that comparison again. The premium rose 3.5 times faster than the check. For a couple, Part B alone consumes $4,869 annually. Add Part D and a supplement, and the number lands near $9,600. That comes straight out of the Social Security check before a single dollar reaches groceries. You budget your gross benefit and then get ambushed by the net one. And it gets worse above certain income thresholds through a surcharge called IRMA. High-income Part B premiums for 2026 range from $284 to $690. A large Roth conversion or a capital gain can trigger that surcharge 2 years later. The look-back is 2 years, so you get billed for a decision you have already forgotten. This is the most preventable expense in retirement, and you can plan around it. Nora's plan needs a healthcare line of roughly $10,000, indexed upward annually. Not a placeholder, not an average, a real line growing faster than everything else. Here's what almost nobody models, and it will decide more of your outcome than returns. 2 retirees can earn identical average returns across 30 years and end up differently. Not slightly differently. One dies wealthy and one runs out at 81. Same average. The variable is order, specifically the order of returns in the first 5 years. Financial planners call it sequence of returns risk, and it only exists while you're withdrawing. Picture Nora retiring with $500,000 and withdrawing $20,000 annually. In scenario 1, her first 3 years return positive 12, positive 9, positive 7%. In scenario 2, the same 3 years return negative 18, negative 6, positive 4. Over 30 years, both scenarios average exactly the same annual return, identical averages. After scenario 1's first 3 years, she has $522,000 remaining. After scenario 2's first 3 years, she has $348,000. A $174,000 difference, produced entirely by calendar luck. And it never recovers, because every future gain compounds on a permanently smaller base. Withdrawing $20,000 from a falling portfolio sells more shares to raise the same cash. Those shares are gone. They cannot participate in the recovery when it eventually arrives. This is why the year you retire matters more than the decade you saved in. And you do not get to choose your year. The calendar chooses for you. What you can choose is how much of your floor depends on the portfolio. Nora's floor is covered by Social Security, so a bad first year cuts travel. Glenn's neighbor across the street retired in 2008 with the same balance and no floor. He cut his medication instead of his vacation because he had no other lever. Same portfolio, same average return, completely different life, decided by an accident of timing. The protection is boring. 2 to 3 years of spending held in cash and short bonds. That bucket lets you stop selling shares during a decline instead of liquidating into it. For Nora, that means roughly $60,000 parked deliberately outside the market. It will underperform in good years. That is the entire point of owning it. Now Tanya's question, because it sounds airtight and it fails in a very specific way. Leave $500,000 in a high-yield savings account earning 5%. That produces $25,000 a year, and the principal never moves, forever. The first problem arrives immediately at the bank counter in the form of taxes. Savings interest is ordinary income, taxed at your full marginal rate every single year. At a 22% federal rate, $25,000 becomes $19,500. Add state tax in most places and you land closer to $18,200. The second problem is that 5% is a rate, not a permanent feature. In 2021, the same account paid 0.5%. That is $2,500. Reinvestment risk means every maturity is a coin flip on the next rate environment. The third problem is the one that quietly destroys the entire premise: inflation. The principal never moves, which is the criticism, not the compliment you think it is. At 3% inflation, $500,000 buys half as much by 2050. Same balance on the statement: half the groceries, half the medication, half the heat. A bank teller will happily show Tanya the 5% number on a screen. That screen does not display the tax, the reinvestment risk, or the purchasing power decay. Here's what actually happens over 24 years at 3% inflation and full taxation. The $18,200 of real spending power falls below $9,000. The account looks identical. The life it funds has been cut in half. Cash is a tool for the first 3 years of retirement, not for 30. Now, the section every competing video on this topic skips, and it is the important one. Every projection you have seen for a couple assumes both people stay alive throughout. Nora and Victor's plan works beautifully. It works right up until one of them dies. Say Victor dies at 71. Nora is 68. Nothing about the house changes. The property tax is still $4,200. The insurance is still $2,100. The utilities barely move. The roof still needs replacing on the same schedule. But Social Security stops paying 2 checks and starts paying exactly one, the larger one. Victor's $23,100 disappears permanently. Nora keeps her $26,400. Household income drops 47% overnight, while household costs drop maybe 12%. That is the survivor penalty, and typical households lose $500 to $1,200 monthly. It gets worse because the tax code stops treating her like half a couple. In 2026, a married couple over 65 gets a $35,500 standard deduction. A single filer over 65 gets $18,150, nearly half. The brackets compress the same way, and they compress fast. A single filer reaches the 22% bracket at $50,401. A married couple does not reach that bracket until $105,700. So Nora's income falls sharply and her marginal tax rate rises at the same time. Estimates put the added federal tax between $3,000 and $8,000 annually, plus Medicare surcharges, because the IRMAA thresholds also cut roughly in half for singles. Less income, higher rate, higher premium, same house, same roof, same property tax bill. This is why widows disproportionately end up in financial trouble despite adequate joint planning. Nothing went wrong with the investments. The structure changed and nobody modeled it for you. Here's what nobody tells you. You can plan for this before it happens. Delaying the higher earner's benefit to 70 raises the survivor check permanently for whoever remains. Roth conversions in the low-tax married years pull income out of the high-tax single years. A term life policy through the vulnerable decade costs less than most cable bills. Even a partial pension survivor election, chosen at retirement, cannot be revisited afterward. Every one of those decisions has a deadline. Most of them arrive before anyone feels old. The survivor penalty is not a tragedy. It is a scheduling problem with a known date range. Which brings us to the second shock, the one the fidelity estimate deliberately excludes. Long-term care is not medical care, and Medicare does not pay for it. It pays for skilled nursing after a hospital stay, capped at 100 days. Custodial care, bathing, dressing, eating, moving is not covered at all. Care Scout's 2025 survey put the national median assisted living cost at $6,200 monthly. That is $74,400 a year, and it rose 5%. A semi-private nursing home room runs $315 per day nationally, $114,975 annually for a shared room. A private room costs $355 daily, $129,000 yearly. Against a $500,000 portfolio, that is 4 years, maybe less. Nora's entire life savings would fund one private nursing home room until she turned 75. Medicaid exists as the backstop, but it requires spending nearly everything down first. In most states, you keep about $2,000 in countable assets. $2,000. The healthy spouse keeps more through spousal impoverishment rules, but the portfolio is gone. Here's what most people get wrong about this risk. You treat it as inevitable. Roughly half of people turning 65 will need some paid long-term care eventually. But the median duration is far shorter than the scenarios that probably terrify you. The distribution matters more than the average, because the tail is what destroys plans. Which means the honest answer is not insure everything or ignore it entirely. It is to decide, deliberately and in writing, which portion of that risk you're carrying. Nora and Victor's home equity of $229,000 is the reserve. That is a real answer. Hoping the question never arrives is not an answer. Here's the finding that reverses almost everything you just heard, and almost nobody reports it. The Employee Benefit Research Institute tracked what retirees actually did with their money. Not what they said, not what they planned, what the account balances actually showed. They followed households for the first 18 years after retirement, sorted by starting assets. Households that retired with between $200,000 and $500,000 spent down 27%. 27.2% across 18 years, not depleted, barely dented. Roughly one-third of retirees still held 100% or more of their starting assets. In their mid-80s, more money than the day they stopped working, 1 in 3. The great fear of running out of money describes a minority of actual outcomes. Ask them why, and the reasons are almost entirely emotional, not financial. 38% said they were saving for an unforeseen cost that might arrive later. 37% said spending down their assets simply felt unnecessary to them. 33% wanted to leave as much as possible behind for their children. David Blanchett found the same pattern from the spending side, using government survey data. Real retiree spending declines roughly 1% per year, adjusted for inflation, throughout retirement. A household spending $100,000 at 65 spends $74,000 at 84. A 26% decline in real spending, and it happens without anyone deciding to. Travel stops. The second car goes. Restaurants become rare. The house gets quieter. Spending curves back up in the final years, but usually not above the starting level. Which means the standard model, constant inflation-adjusted spending for 30 years, overstates the need. Every calculator you have used assumes you will spend at 88 like you did at 65. You will not. Almost nobody does, and the models never got updated to reflect that. So here is the honest, uncomfortable summary of $500,000 in 2026. Most people holding that number will not run out of money. You probably won't either. They will spend 2 decades being quietly afraid of a thing that never happens. And then a survivor event or a care event will take it anyway, unplanned. Most people with $500,000 don't run out of money, they run out of permission. That is the actual failure mode, not depletion. Paralysis, followed by an unmodeled shock. You can solve both, but only one of them is a math problem. The other is deciding in advance what the money is for while you can still use it. So, is $500,000 enough to retire on in 2026? For Nora and Victor, with Social Security covering their floor, the answer is yes. Not comfortably by magazine standards, comfortably by the standard of their actual life. For a 55-year-old with no pension, no paid-off house, and no Social Security yet, no. Not because 500,000 is a bad number, but because the gap years are expensive. The number was never the answer. The structure around the number is the answer. What your floor costs, what covers it, what happens when one person is gone. Run those 3 questions, and you will know more than any calculator can tell you. Glenn is still working, waiting for $2 million he does not need. Marisol saves $400 a month and thinks she is hopelessly behind at 34. She is not. She has 31 years and the single most valuable asset available. Tanya still likes the bank account, and inflation is still quietly disagreeing with her. And Nora stopped doing division in the dark at 3 in the morning. She put the real numbers on paper, found the gap was 128 monthly. Then she scheduled her retirement date for the March after Victor turns 67. If this was useful, subscribe to Coach Nora Money and hit the notification bell. We break down the hidden math behind the financial decisions you face every day. No hustle culture, no shame, just the arithmetic with the sources attached to it. Make the decision that matches your reality, not someone else's sales pitch. $500,000 isn't a finish line, it's a hinge, and hinges swing both ways.